In this presentation, we will begin discussing the Baroque era. The Baroque style period ranges from 1600 to 1750, but can be divided into a couple of periods within that range. This presentation will discuss some background of the style period as a whole and then focus on the early Baroque, which is from 1600 to 1700. To put the time period in context, here are some of the events occurring during this time frame. Shakespeare wrote Hamlet in 1600. Cervantes wrote Don Quixote in 1605. Jamestown was founded in 1607. Galileo determined that the Earth orbits the Sun in 1610. The King James Bible was published in 1611. Newton's Mathematical Principles was published in 1687. Witchcraft trials in Salem, Massachusetts were occurring in 1692. And Robinson Crusoe was published in 1719, and Gulliver's Travels in 1726. The Baroque era was a time characterized by absolute monarchy, bloody religious wars, Protestants versus Catholics, and the exploration and colonization of the New World. The rising middle class, eager to partake in artistic and musical culture, became a viable patron of the arts. Public concert halls and the first opera house were built so that anyone with the price of admission could attend. The Baroque era was considered to be an age of discovery. Prominent figures included Galileo, Copernicus, and Sir Isaac Newton. Music making became centered in the home, church, and university, rather than in the salons of the aristocracy. Many musical works of this era were functional, being created for specific occasions, such as weddings, festivals, or religious services. The Baroque time period was a time of flamboyant lifestyle, and the Baroque art styles tend to fill the space. In visual art, the Baroque style implies motion and is busy. With this came very elaborate architecture, as can be seen in the picture on this slide. There was also a change in the approach to science during this time. Science was now based on experiments, not just observation, and many inventions and improvements resulted from these changes. Baroque, from Barroco, a Portuguese word meaning a pearl of irregular shape, was the name given to the new, rough, bold instrumental sound in music and excessive ornamentation in the visual arts. It signified distortion, excess, and extravagance. Instrumental groups approached the size of the modern orchestra, and choral works with 24, 48, and even 53 separate parts were written. The spirit of the Baroque period required of the composer that the emotional units they created in music be large or long-lasting and clearly defined. It did not change hurriedly from one mood to another as it did in the Renaissance madrigal. Instead, each large section of a piece carried a single mood or affection throughout: joy, jealousy, resignation, agony, triumph, etc. A musical element that remained constant throughout the early and late Baroque periods was the basso continuo, or thorough bass. It was a small ensemble consisting of at least two instrumentalists who provided the foundation for the melody or melodies. One performer played an instrument that could produce chords, such as an organ, harpsichord, or large lute, while the other player played only the bass notes: cello, viola da gamba, or bassoon. That player always doubled the note in the left hand of the first player, thereby giving the bass line new and greater power. When listening to music of this period, the basso continuo can always be heard. The harpsichord was an instrument that could serve double duty. It could be a solo instrument as well as the principal instrument for accompaniment. Music of the early Baroque period was homophonic. There was a new type of vocal music called monody, solo song with instrumental accompaniment. It was cultivated by a group of Florentine writers, artists, and musicians known as the Camerata. We'll discuss more about the Camerata later. There were two different melodic styles: dramatic virtuosic style in singing and the mechanical repetitious style in instrumental music. One melodic technique used was the sequence, which took a musical motive or idea or theme and repeated it at a successively higher or lower pitch. Another way of thinking of it is as a musical stamp that was used over and over. Rhythm was characterized by uniformity, with rhythmic patterns surfacing again and again throughout the music. Dynamics, or the volume, did not change gradually from one section or piece to the next. Instead, a single dynamic range, whether loud or soft, would remain until it was abruptly replaced by another. This was called terrace dynamics. There were no crescendos or decrescendos diminuendos. Instrumental music saw huge changes. In earlier periods, whatever instruments were available at any given time were used to play whatever parts were available. Now parts were assigned to specific instruments according to the natural strength and weakness of each instrument. Giovanni Gabrieli was the first composer to assign specific parts to specific instruments. He also was the first to indicate dynamic markings such as piano and forte. The technical improvements in instrument making led to the rise in the level of virtuosic playing. Domenico Scarlatti and Antonio Vivaldi were among the master composers of the era who wrote virtuosic works for the keyboard and violin. The rise of virtuosity was prevalent in vocal music as well, due to the rise of opera, which required a phenomenal technique by the performers. Harmony made huge leaps during this period. One that is still used today was the Baroque chord progression of 5-1, or dominant to tonic, to signify the end of a phrase or song. Up until this time, there were several different modes of music. Major and minor keys were chosen because reducing music to just two qualities of sound enabled the listener to more easily distinguish one from the other. It made it easier to listen to. As a result of the transition to a major-minor tonal system, a new tuning system was established based on the division of the octave into 12 equal half steps. This system, known as equal temperament, allowed instruments to perform in any key. It is still in use today. The well-known composer Johann Sebastian Bach was able to demonstrate his ability to write in every one of the 12 keys in his work Well-Tempered Clavier, a 2-volume keyboard collection. A new emphasis was placed on chords and the bass part during the Baroque. Composers now wrote melodies to fit chord progressions and not the other way around. The most characteristic feature of the Baroque basso continuo or figured bass developed from this emphasis. The common way for it to be performed was for an instrument to play the continuo line, while another improvised chords or melodies according to the numbers of the basso continuo. There was a lot of freedom for the performers because only the type of chord, not the exact realization, is indicated. Using basso continuos emphasized the bass line, saved composers time, and saved paper. Women were able to study and work as musicians in the Baroque era. A group of women singers, known as the Ensemble of the Ladies, were highly acclaimed in their time, as are similar groups today. They often showcased the work of composer Claudio Monteverdi. Other outstanding female vocalists of this era are shown on the slide. Francesca Caccini was an Italian composer and singer. Barbara Strozzi was a singer and composer. Faustina Bordani was an Italian soprano. Francesca Cozzani was an Italian soprano. And Elisabeth Claude Jacquet de la Guerre was a French harpsichordist and composer. Take a moment to listen to Strozzi's Amor de Million, Sleepyhead Cupid. The Camerata wanted to resurrect the musical dramatic art of ancient Greece, but very little was known of the actual music. They decided that it must have been a free-moving melody over a simple chordal accompaniment. Originally, this produced monody, but later it was applied to a full drama known as opera. Opera, or work, implied an association of music and drama, where music heightened the emotional intensity of the action that unfolded on the stage. This art form combines vocal and instrumental music, fusing them with poetry, drama, acting, scenery, costumes, and sometimes dance. In opera, the libretto is the text or script of the work, written by the librettist, that the composer sets to music. An aria, Italian for air, is a song for solo voice with orchestral accompaniment, often of an emotional nature. A da capo aria is an aria in ternary form, or ABA form. The arias are often the high points for the audience. An aria has a well-defined melody with a definite beginning, high point, and end. For this reason, an aria may be sung effectively out of context on a vocal program that is unrelated to the opera. The plot and action of an opera are moved forward through recitative, a device in an opera that resembles the natural patterns of speech. The words in a recitative are often sung on the same pitch and may include rapid question and answer dialogue between characters. There are two standard styles of recitative: secco, or dry, which is accompanied only by the continuo instruments and moves along freely, and accompagnato, which is accompanied by orchestra and thus employs a more steady beat. A good way to distinguish between aria and recitative is that an aria usually expresses feelings, while the recitative usually relates action. In addition to arias and recitatives, an opera may contain ensemble numbers, such as duets, trios, quartets, etc., in which the characters join together to sing about their feelings. A chorus in an opera is used to back up solo voices or functions independently. It may reflect or comment on the action, or even be a part of it. The role of the orchestra is to set the mood of the opera before and during the different scenes. An overture is an instrumental piece played before the start of the opera. It may or may not contain melodies from the opera itself. Sinfonias are what the musical interludes between the scenes were called in the Baroque era. Baroque opera houses had none of the solemn atmosphere that we associate with opera today. Those who could afford it bought box seats in the galleries where they talked, played cards, ate and drank, and occasionally spat on those who walked around the less expensive open floor below. There were no rows of seats on the main floor. Under those circus-like conditions, an opera had to be of exceptionally fine quality to hold the audience's attention. Women were still forbidden from singing in church choirs, but also were not allowed to appear on stage in some church-dominated cities in Italy. This encouraged the use of the castrato, whose voice combined the power of a male frame with the agility and brilliance of the high female voice. So enamored were Baroque audiences with the castrato sound that they did not think it incongruous to hear the greatest heroic male roles of the operatic stage sung by men with womanly voices. The castrati disappeared from opera completely by the early 20th century. That is why contemporary performances have women sing the castrato roles today. The first public opera house opened in Venice in 1637, making opera available to everyone. Though there were 17 public opera houses in Venice at that time, public opera took longer, until about 1700, to reach many other large cities. The Baroque opera's staging and sets were so magnificent and expensive that Venetian opera became a tourist attraction. Stage effects would include gods descending from clouds or riding across the sky in chariots, ships tossing or boulders splitting. The sets were works of art with backdrops that looked like arched cities and avenues stretching into the horizon. The earliest surviving opera is Eurydice by Jacopo Peri, which was performed in 1600 in Florence. The first great opera was composed in 1607 by Monteverdi called Orfeo. Both operas are based on the Greek myth of Orpheus's descent into Hades to bring his beloved Eurydice back. Most of the Baroque operas came from Greek mythology or ancient history. They were composed for court ceremonial occasions and were often a means to flatter the aristocracy. Other operas by Monteverdi include Arianna and The Coronation of Poppea. The love duet, as found in The Coronation of Poppea, became an essential operatic feature in the portrayal of powerful human emotions. In Monteverdi's work, the ideals of the Florentine camerata found fulfillment. Listen to Monteverdi's Tu sei morta from Orfeo. Although Italian opera had gained popularity in the rest of Europe, it was rejected in France. The French sought to create a national style employing the traditions of court ballet and classical tragedy. Instrumental to this movement was the composer Jean-Baptiste Lully, the most important composer of French Baroque opera. Lully found favor with King Louis XIV through his operas. Lully's accomplishments included the successful adaptation of the recitative to the French language, the formation of the French overture, and lush dance movements that embodied the spirit of the French royal court. The first prominent English composer of opera was Henry Purcell. Yes, he actually wrote his libretto in English. Purcell wrote masques and operas for several venues, adopting elements from both Italian and French opera. He created the basso ostinato or ground bass, which he used to symbolize grief. It simply repeated the bass line throughout the aria. Henry Purcell wrote Dido and Aeneas in 1689 for a girls' boarding school where he taught. The librettist was Nahum Tate, who based the plot on an episode from Virgil's Aeneid. In summary, Aeneas is shipwrecked at Carthage on the northern shore of Africa. He and the young Carthaginian queen Dido fall in love. Aeneas receives a message that he must continue on his journey to find Rome, and so he decides that he must leave. In Dido's grief, she decides that her fate is death. After singing a moving recitative called Thy Hand, Belinda, followed by a beautiful aria known as When I Am Laid in Earth, Dido's Lament, Dido stabs herself with Aeneas' sword and throws herself on a funeral pyre, whose flames light the way for Aeneas' ships as they sail out of the harbor. Dido's Lament begins with a 5-measure chromatically descending ground bass or basso ostinato. In this aria, the ground bass is repeated 11 times. Listen to both of these works from Dido and Aeneas by Henry Purcell. Besides opera, a new instrumental genre was begun in the early Baroque. A sonata, something sounded, is a type of chamber music that is played on an instrument. It consists of a collection of several short pieces called movements. There were 2 types of sonatas: sonata da camera, the chamber sonata, and sonata da chiesa, the church sonata. The sonata da camera was made up of a series of dance-like movements. These included allemande, which was slow, courante, which was fast, sarabande, which was slow, gavotte, which was moderate, bourrée, fast, minuet, moderate, and jig, fast. The sonata da chiesa consisted of movements that were designated only by tempo markings, such as grave, vivace, adagio, and allegro. The church sonata was intended to provide background music for religious services, while the chamber sonata, with its link to dance, was usually heard at court or in the private homes of the well-to-do. A sonata might be written for a solo keyboard instrument, such as the harpsichord, or it might be composed for a solo melody instrument like the violin, in which case 3 performers would be involved: the violinist and 2 people playing the continuo. A trio sonata would consist of 2 solo instruments plus the basso continuo, thereby involving 4 people. Arcangelo Corelli was a famous composer of trio sonatas. He was also the first to catalog a composer's music chronologically. The term opus, meaning work, yes, the same definition as opera, was used. Listen to Corelli's Trio Sonata Opus 3 No. 2 in D major, first movement. Once finished with this presentation, please proceed to the late Baroque characteristics and vocal music presentation.